We back. Part 2. Part 1, we popped the tail on. You know. Still doing the recording in double time. Like I said, the original was an hour and 57 minutes. I do still have that, so if anybody actually wanted to see that, that's possible. But we'll go ahead and attach on the first layer of the body onto the metal piece here. And we'll start with wrapping some string. You get a base there to try to help prevent the feathers from sliding around, because sometimes the stems do. We'll trim that off, a little excess. Now the first layer, like I said, is just going to go on flat. It's going to pop out a little bit because of the middle rod being so thin. But when they're wet, they will form sort of right to it. And the next layer that goes on after this will be the layer that bucks out. So I'm going to do one on each side, 3 feathers in each, maybe 4, 3, 4, whatever, just enough to give it a solid color look. So go ahead and put these on. Now this is pretty straightforward, I'd assume. Unless you've never made a bucktail before, then I guess this is still helpful, but just wrap the first layer on just like I would wrap, normally. Now, I guess I'll take this time while I'm wrapping this up to point out that I'm not a big fan of double-bladed spinners. They look nice, but when they pull through the water, they're a little heavy. Like, they definitely have serious drag. And more often than not, on the few that I have made, when I'm using them, when I get close to shore or close to the boat, I notice that more often than with a single blade, the fish kind of comes up close to almost to bite it, and then all of a sudden just turns at the last minute. And I don't really know any other reason that it could be other than coincidence. So that's my opinion on that. If anybody else has an opinion, I'd love to hear it. We'll just attach these white ones on the other side. You kind of fill it in a little bit. Get the tail to wrap around the hair piece that I have on the hook, which I'm excited for. See how that works out. Right now it's just annoying the shit out of me, but it's all good. Now sometimes the feathers will slide around. That's why with my hand I'm holding them in place. Oop, there's a little bit of glue on the fingers. I'll pop a little bit of glue on the thread line just to keep that thread in place. One feather fell out there. Just to make sure that when I'm trimming the ends up, that the feathers aren't going to fall out. There's still a tight grip there. Still not too bad. Pretty simple still. It still looks good. So we will put on a little bit of these. Some of my favorites. The Gobi pattern kind of works well in my neighborhood, so I'm going to still stick with the striped light and dark browns because that's what they look like. More dots, but these are close enough. So I'll just attach 3 of these around it. Now I will point out that when I do use these feathers, they're pretty bulky and the stems are a little thick, so I try not to buck them out too much because then they just stick out ridiculously. So I form them down a little bit and put them on their sides so that they're almost like a blade, on the lure, and I've noticed it really does help with line twist. Although I mentioned it before, I don't really mind it so much. It's all part of the game for me, so, and because I use so many spinners, at first it did bother me, but I just worked past it. So we'll just pop on these feathers here, sideways like I was saying. Kind of acts like a router. We'll just space them out evenly. I cut the third one there while I was taking footage off the camera to make it more like a wing. It was a little too thick. The stem was extremely thick, and I could see that when I put it on it was gonna be too stiff. So I chopped that in half, as you can see here. Chop that in half so it'll just stick out. It'll look like the rest of them, but it just doesn't go straight through. That's all right. We'll just tighten that up. And that hanging piece is driving me absolutely nuts. So we'll get a good wrap going here. Since these stems are a little thick and haven't added any glue yet to the purple and white layer that I added, other than a little piece to hold it on. So I'll do the same again and just add a little piece to hold it on. Whoa, almost gluing my fingers. So like I said, those stems are really stiff, so they're gonna hold that hook with the fur in the center at the back really well. I'm excited about that. So I'm gonna trim that up and we'll apply more glue. But for, you know, a base tail, that's what I would call a base tail right there. It looks still pretty good. Everything shimmies around. It's a little bucked out, but when it's wet, it'll sleek down, that's for sure. So I've already pre-cut the next layer. Like I said, I wasn't gonna sit here and make you watch that happen, but I've just taken a normal long feather and used one tip and then two bodies, because the bodies are a little bit fatter and they're a little bit fuzzy with the fur up closer to the stem, so they add a nice top look. You wouldn't see that if it was on the tail. It would all be covered, so I don't worry about using those ones for any of the long tail pieces. We'll go in and trim this up here. I'd like to give a shout out to, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, Dieter. You're the man. I'm glad that you got around to making a couple of these lures and that you enjoyed it. I hope that you continue to. I was thoroughly enjoying your video, man, for real. But I definitely wanted to point out, when I fish these, it does take a lot of practice with the casting. And whenever the lure hits the water, for me, right away I pull fast and get it spinning and then start dropping to the required depth after I've started my retrieve. But here is going to be my popped out layer, and all the detail for this lure comes in this layer. Now you could put it sideways like I did with the brown and black ones, or you could curve them out so they kind of all dance out like curls. I don't know how you would explain that, but for this purpose today I am going to attach them on a side angle and on their side, so it's almost maximum pop. So when this pulls through the water, it's going to get a nice bend in the feathers, and they're really going to wiggle around. They're not going to lie down as much as some of my other lure designs, their patterns do. They lie down and kind of wave like a body, as opposed to here, as you can see, even when you start pulling this thread around, it sticks out even more, which makes it difficult to wrap. But with practice and holding the stems tightly in your hands in place, you can usually keep the feathers exactly where you want them. I do find it's key though, the first time I wrap the thread around, I do not go extremely tight right away, and it's on the second time around that I really pull it tight, and they don't seem to move as much when you do that. I will go one white, one purple, just like the base tail. Still on a real big angle, so there's almost no way that these feathers will naturally lie down. That's the objective that I'm chasing here. So in pre-thought of making this lure, I definitely wanted a body, a generalized body color, and that was the purple and white. So that's why I'm gonna add a lot of this bulky body layer to really fill that in, so that color is dominant when it's in the water. And the brown's just more or less gonna give a good accent to the shape, or give more shape to the purple and white. Video 3, we're gonna pop the collar on. Now you can see as I'm applying 3 all at once. Now, for the purpose of this video, I did that, and I guess also for the purpose of the design I was chasing, it worked. Sometimes, depending on how big the feathers are or how strong of a pattern I'm chasing, I might go singly, or I could jump all the way up to holding a handful. Like, that all just comes in good preparation before you attack your goal. You gotta really see and know what it's gonna look like in the end, and that helps a lot with bringing it together and keeping it smooth, which really for me just came in a lot of time and practice. Now once you apply these, you can move them around a little bit to fill in any small gaps that you can see. You just look around, make sure that everything looks kind of uniform. Sometimes they do move around, even when you're applying some later on around the opposite side of where you've already done. Just holding it is slowly moving feathers around. So sometimes beforehand, before the last wrap, you just want to make sure that you kind of have everything in a good spot. I always want to make sure too that you're pinching in the exact same area and you're almost starting a groove with your fingers to make sure that everything stays pushed back from the eye, so you're not getting carried away. In the past, I've gotten carried away and just ended up covering the whole eye because I've added too much and didn't make sure that I pushed back. So I'll just put a couple drops around, not just in one spot now, because there's so much on there that I applied all at once without gluing at all. So the glue is dry. Everything to do with the main body is going to be on now. Now if you didn't want to hold it with your hands and you thought that was too much, you can put the feathers in these little clamps and clamp the clamp with the feathers on it right to the hook or to the lure that you're attaching them to, and those will hold them in place fine. And then you can go ahead and wrap those on. But I don't know, for me that's just an added step that takes time. I'd rather just hold it. Sometimes it's a little more difficult, but practice makes perfect, I guess. So I'm going to trim this up here. We'll give a good wrap with some glue and get that all tightly set up. Now I noticed that I did want a little extra room, and I do want the collar to somewhat pop out. Maybe not really though, but I could use a little extra room. I can see that now. So I'm going to chop back a little bit of that, expose a little bit more. And then we'll get in there and get a good tight wrap, seal that off. Now, I wasn't really sure, if anybody was thinking that everything was going on at once, all wrapped together, and it was like a really big, thick wad tied up. Because really, I guess from the beginning, I never even really thought of that. It just worked better to have a certain distance you're working with and work across it, so you have, you don't work up some really big bulk there. I've never done it like that, but it seems to work fine this way. It keeps it slim and slender and a little bit easier to attach it one layer at a time. You can get a little bit more detail that way too. So it looks pretty good, I'm not gonna lie. And that's gonna be it for video 2. In video 3, we're gonna pop the collar and do up that weight at the front. So I hope you stay tuned for part 3, where we get into some really tricky stuff, popping those collars.